So as the video shows, the various changes we're facing today, technology, for example, is not only affecting what we do, what jobs we have, the different tasks we do it, the pace we do it, where we do our jobs. So it's really dictating how we are looking for jobs, how we are being skilled for new jobs, and how that's affecting our well-being, whatever well-being means in today's world. So I'll start off with a question to you, Dr. Paul Schulte. As we heard, we no longer go to work and have one job all our life. There's a whole job-life continuum. We're exposed to risks in one, to different hazards in another, and the exposures have a long-term effect and may affect us upon retirement and other. What does that mean to us today? What is the difference in these different jobs along that life continuum, and how can we look at them and try to address these issues that we're facing?
Well, thank you, and thank all of you for being here. It's a real stimulating meeting, and I'm delighted to be here. I would like to note that what I say are my own opinions and not necessarily the opinions of the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. We are going to see a situation where throughout one's working life, a person will have many jobs, possibly many careers. What is going to be the result of that? For one thing, there will be many times when people are not working. There will be many times when people are concerned about whether they will be still working, the precarity of work. There will be many times when people are working at less than their full capabilities. They may be underemployed. These are areas that we need to start to think about. Clearly, in my area of occupational safety and health, we've historically thought of individual jobs and individual hazards. Now, I believe it's time to think about the whole working life continuum. And so, how a person progresses through their working life, what kinds of health effects and stresses they pick up in one job and they carry to the next job. What happens when they're not working? We know that there's a strong literature on the health effects of unemployment. We've also seen a growing literature on the health effects of underemployment, which are similar in some ways to unemployment. We know that the kind of anxiety that arises from precarious work can be linked to many kinds of psychosocial and physical health effects. And so it's time for the work community, and particularly the occupational safety and health community, to think about this working life continuum. So how do we do that? Well, we need some sort of way to gauge all of that, or to put our arms around it. We need some sort of overarching kind of construct or concept, and maybe the concept of well-being is the one that we can use. We all talk about well-being. It's used as a conjunctive, and you've heard it already in this movie, health and well-being, good life and well-being, whatever. But what does it mean? There are many definitions of well-being in different fields, in different literatures. There are different ways to measure well-being, but we really have not operationalized it for policy. And in many cases, we've not operationalized it for research. We need standardized metrics to address how we're going to use well-being. If we're going to think about the evolving world of work, we need to be able to somehow measure that. We need to then identify what are the threats to well-being, what are the promoters to well-being, and then what kinds of policies that we could develop that would allow us to alter the threats and increase the promoters. So with that, maybe I'll...
Thank you, Paul. We'll come back to the area of well-being a little bit, but maybe I turn to Maureen to tell us more about one of the biggest issues that we face today in the world of work, which is mental health at work, and what are really the antecedents to poor well-being at work and poor mental health. What are the real stress factors that we face today in various walks of life and in our various daily working lives? How how would you, throughout your research, explain to us the various effort-reward models, resource demand models? How do they apply with the changing world of work? Has anything really changed, or are we just seeing the surfacing of issues that already existed but are just exacerbated by various aspects?
Thank you. So my background is in work and organisational psychology, and I'd firstly like to say that I don't think the discipline of psychology can resolve the issue of workplace stress. That's basically what I look at, is mental health at work. We definitely have evidence that working conditions and work quality is related to the psychological health and well-being of workers. But we need to go beyond that to look at how work is organised, and then we need to go even further, and this is really stretching the limits of my brain and understanding of society, and this is why I wish I was a sociologist or a political scientist or something else. But, you know, I think that there are big problems in the world of work now which are not related to technology, which may be exacerbated by technology, which is the conflict between the employer and the worker. So we're talking about the conflict between capital and labour, and that conflict is not going to go away, and to me it's what is really going to be a threat to worker health and well-being. So there's evidence already, I think, that we can't really trust management all the time to do the right thing for humanity. So we know that 1% of the world's people own, you know, half the world's wealth. We know that the top CEOs in the UK earn, by the 4th of January, the average income of everybody else in the UK. They earn 133 times the national average salary. In Australia, the Prime Minister is earning $500,000 a year. The Vice-Chancellors of Australian universities are earning $1.5 million a year. It's really outrageous. You know, if you don't watch what's going on up there, the resources are just constantly flowing up there. And one of the things about work stress, it's about, do you have enough resources to do the job? And there's, you know, there's threats in the public sector, because in the healthcare sector, for example, you know, there aren't enough resources to do that. Well, that's because a lot of the funds and the resources are going to the top in society. So, I mean, yesterday we saw the great keynote speech where you saw wages going like this, and GDP and profits and productivity going like this. So the workers in society are not getting a fair go at having access to that resource. And then the other thing is that in the OECD countries in the last 30 years, corporate tax has been reduced from 45% to around about 20%. So this just all means that there's not enough resources in the system for social security, for decent work in the public sector, and for decent work for the average person. So maybe I'll just leave it to them. We'll come back. Okay,
thanks for that. The way you're speaking, you're suggesting a totally new economy, not based on growth or productivity.
Indeed.
But maybe we'll come back to that in a moment to hear your views, what the world will be like with no wages, maybe like it was 200 years ago when that concept and model didn't exist. Hamid, maybe I can come to you. We heard a bit about well-being and the concept of well-being being larger than health and physical health and mental health, but also probably economic, social, spiritual well-being, and how that links to worker identity and satisfaction. What would you say really makes well-being flourish, and what are the key constructs and foundations for having that concept flourish in today's world?
Thanks, and hello everybody. Thanks for being here at this time in the afternoon. Before answering that question, let me just second what Maureen said. I very much come to this from the same perspective. I don't have the statistics about the US, but I guess if they had done this for the US rather than the 4th of January, probably be the first hour of on January 1st, in terms of the income gap. So let me just leave it at that. It's that bad.
Yeah.
But I come to this, my background is in technology and the relationship between technology and the economy. So I come to this from what I call the questions like this from what I call the division of labor between humans and machines. And when I say division of labor, I don't mean that this is something naturally divided. You know, usually we hear these stories from technologists, but also from economists, that there's a natural division of labor between humans and machines. Humans are good at some things, machines are good at some other things, and that's where the line is drawn. That couldn't be further from truth. That is not how things happen. And to tell you how, I want to use this, three terms that people usually use, to basically draw these lines. They say the dangerous, the dirty, and the dull work goes to machines, and the human beings are going to do the fun and creative work and so on. I'm afraid that is, really not accurate. And here are some examples, from everything that we have heard the last 2 days here, very, very interesting, presentations just speaking to these facts. For instance, in terms of the dull work, and the boring work and so on, we've heard again, from people about, Amazon mechanical workers. We have people here who have studied this very, very closely. We hear about, Uber drivers who are under constant stress and anxiety because they do not know how they are evaluated. They don't have any understanding of how the algorithms, judge them and so on. And that creates the kinds of stresses that Paul was talking about in terms of, re-employment or continued work and so on and so forth. Or in terms of dirty work, we have this notion of content moderators, that work actually in places such as the Philippines, Pakistan, India, and many other parts of the world, just cleaning up the mess that we have created in the global north, in terms of, violence, sexually explicit material, and so on. Many of these people, according to very well-documented accounts, end up basically with depression. The turnover, in these jobs are very fast. And we have a similar case, although we normally do not think of drone pilots, for instance, drones that are used for warfare. We don't think of them as workers, but they are workers. And we see the similar situation with drone pilots, because there also they have to just process these images, thousands of hours of images that are basically collected by drones to monitor the situation on the ground. And these human beings have to basically to go through these videos, moderating the content and so on. And there's a lot of turnover in those jobs as well. And finally, about the dangerous work. It is basically across the board. Just very quickly, again this afternoon on one of the panels there was an interesting discussion about women Uber drivers and what danger means for them as opposed to men Uber drivers. And in the safety of the night, in big cities and so on, is it okay for an Uber driver, a female Uber driver, to basically to work in those hours and so on? But also, in a place such as California itself, in the heart of the Silicon Valley, many of you probably have seen these reports from The Guardian about Tesla's factory, where the rate of work-related incidents at Tesla in Fremont, California, this is the heart of the Silicon Valley, was higher than industry average until about 2 years ago. The Guardian reported this. They went to Elon Musk and he said, well, we are a startup. We have to basically work hard to make this work. But when he goes to investors, he gives a very different story. He says, that we are the most profitable, factory in the industry, and so on and so forth. So these are examples to me of how the lines between humans and machines really are not drawn naturally, at least in these respects.
Thank you, Hamid. That's quite clear, and the examples are quite helpful to situate the problems we're facing. Maybe I turn to you, Maria, to give us some examples from Latin America. I know that there's been some research on the trend of teleworking and working in digital platforms. How has that changed the employment relationship, and how has that changed the level of social protection and access to care in some workers? I mean, just to note that these are, again, issues issues that have been around, but like piecemeal work, which is an old story, but with the existence of platform and different channels that allow us to practice this kind of work from different workspaces, that's even creating more possibilities maybe for informality or other. How do you see that in Latin America, and how are you dealing with it?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation. It has been a very pleasure to hear all of your amazing interventions and studies. What I want to bring today to the panel, my research focus on employment conditions and access to healthcare and equity in health. So, based on the title of the panel, I think that new forms of work associated with technology, like working on digital platforms and telework, can be understood as new forms of informality that have a clear impact on health status, and as Manal said, the well-being of workers, and also become a barrier for accessing healthcare. In Latin America, as in many other countries, there has been a clear emerge of teleworkers and workers in digital platforms. Although data are difficult to gather for the region, some data are, for example, it is estimated that 7.5 million of Brazil workers are teleworking, nearly the 2 million in Mexico and Argentina, 500,000 in Chile, and around 20,000 in Colombia and Costa Rica. If we think about estimation related to digital platform workers, Latin America region, I'm thinking about Uber, Latin America has the highest number of simultaneous trips worldwide, with Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, Mexico City and Sao Paulo being the cities with the most number of trips. It is estimated to have 500,000 Uber drivers in Brazil, 100,000 in Chile, and between 2,000 and 3,000 new drivers in Argentina each week. So this can show the importance of discussing these issues for the region. And I think that based on your question, Manal, how these new forms of work can modify working conditions and employment conditions, I think that in terms of working conditions, the main result is the relocation of the workspace. Yeah, we no longer have the image of the enterprise as a place that can be controlled or secure. Although instead of that, the workspace is translated to workers' home in case of teleworkers, or to the street. Yeah, for example, in the case of Uber drivers. Okay, in terms of employment conditions, of course, as we all know or have been discussing here, the labor relation is blurred. For example, in the case of teleworkers, we in fact have cases of dependent workers and also independent workers, but workers in digital platforms are in a more disadvantaged position. And why is that? It's because in that case, it happens an employment misclassification, right? Are they employees? Are they own account workers? And a very important issue is that these platforms claim to be software providers, but no employers. They claim to be software providers, but even though they don't even say that they are transport service providers. So, based on research by Candini, they are shadow employers. These new forms of work associated with technology lead us to new contractual forms that can be defined as non-standard, flexible, atypical, contingent, temporary, and precarious. What are the implications that this has in terms of health? Well, as Maureen and other colleagues here have already stated, they have an important effect on psychosocial risk, but they also have an important issue regarding accessing to healthcare. And based on a study we conducted in FLASCO comparing Latin America, Africa, and Asia, we concluded that informal workers tend to have a functional conception of health, and it is associated with the availability to work. That is only based on qualitative study. That is one major conclusion. this makes them postpone as much as they can the seek for help. And they tend to be, they feel like they don't have the right to get sick. So they usually keep on working even if they present ailments. When this barrier is overcome, other barriers are presented to contact the system, right? And those barriers are associated with the opportunity cost of losing time of work, because sometimes they are day pay. And of course, their lack of protection in terms of social security makes them postpone their look for help, because sometimes they have to pay for that attention. So maybe...
Thank you for that. That's quite clear in terms of different platforms that technology have allowed us to practice work and sometimes have allowed less protections but has created jobs. And we come back to this dilemma of, is poorer happier? Are some, what trade-offs do we need to actually have something to do? Do we really need to work? And we've discussed questions of universal income for everyone, and what that means for your ambition and work and life, and the various sectors and occupations that we face today. But before I get to that, I think it was interesting. This is the ILO 100th centenary, and it's quite a special year that we're celebrating. And we had a recent declaration that came out of our International Labour Conference, and that declaration states that safe and healthy working conditions are fundamental to decent work. My question is, what does that mean? How can it be fundamental to decent work if today decent work has so many dimensions that we don't seem to control, and activities of work don't seem to be under anyone's control to take responsibility and accountability of preventing them, managing them, and addressing them? So my question to you, Paul, as an occupational safety and health expert, how do you see the field of health and safety evolving to answer to a workplace that no longer looks like a workplace, to answer to a place where OSH management systems may not be relevant or applicable, to answer to a place where everywhere we are working? Who is protecting, who is assessing those risks, be they ergonomic, be they psychosocial, chemical, biological, in our homes, on airplanes, in public workspaces? How is this field going to evolve to allow for safety and health to remain fundamental to decent work?
That's a great question, and you answered it in your asking, in the sense that if occupational safety and health is going to make a difference and have an impact on all these changes, then it has to expand its focus. And it has to have a whole new procedure of bringing together different disciplines that are part of occupational safety and health and ones that aren't, to allow for starting to address all these kinds of changes that we're going to see, and we're starting to see in the world of work. Now, the language belies a lot of the reality in some of this. First of all, we talk about work as if it's a homogeneous activity when we know it isn't. We know that some work is changing rapidly, some work will still be the same. People still may be exposed to silica and asbestos in 10 and 20 years. But other people may be suffering from stress from never getting off their computer. We're going to see a heterogeneous nature of work, and we need to have solutions that are heterogeneous in their impact. We also know that we're seeing a diverse set of opinions in the literature about the impact of technology. There is one part of the literature that says that the end of work is near, and that then poses a lot of questions. Well, then what? That people will be replaced by robots, but robots don't go to restaurants. Robots don't buy cars. So how are we going to have economic transactions in the marketplace? There's another position in the literature, though, that says every time there has been technological change, new abundance has come with it, new types of jobs. And so right now there's a debate going on. We do know, regardless of which position will happen, as technological change comes in, hundreds of millions of workers will be displaced, at least in the short run, if not long term. They will, the McKinsey company estimates 400 million people globally will be displaced. Those workers many of them may get new jobs, but they will need new training. They will need reskilling. They will need to understand how to be flexible and nimble within the world of work. We don't have that kind of system now in various countries of training people. And until we do, it's going to be difficult for people to be able to thrive as technology changes occur. We need to have also, in the interim, as workers are displaced, we need to think about what are the social protections that will help people and carry them across to the new reality. And I won't get into this now, but maybe we will later, if the other side is correct and there will be less jobs and less people working, what will people do for meaning? What will people do for well-being, which includes personal satisfaction and meaningfulness in their lives? And so these, to get back to the beginning then of this, these are the kind of issues that the field of occupational safety and health, which I think is well positioned, need to start to address, and it's going to take a whole new mental rearrangement in the field to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I think we can reflect also on the ILO Future of Work Commission report and some of the work that's happened since then that suggests that we should be focusing on lifelong learning and more of a human-centered approach because we don't know, the different risks that are happening and the different areas that we need to be skilled, reskilled, and upskilled in as we move into these various changes. The only thing that worries some of us with this human-centered approach is, again, a focus and responsibility on the worker who's trying to make a living. And it seems to me that we may need to be, focusing the direction towards the state. Is the state in these changing workspaces going to have to play a stronger role in regulating or in organizing workspaces for people? So I come to you, Hamid. I know you may have some suggestions as to how informality in technological work can actually find its social protection in other places than in looking to an employer to ensure that kind of protection.
Well, there's so many angles to this, and I didn't mean to talk about this, but since this was brought up, many of these issues are nowadays raised in the name of AI, and we heard about this, in this conference. That's actually my original background. That's what I did my doctoral work on, and so on. So let me say just a few words, because I feel that there's a lot of confusion about what AI is about, what AI systems are capable of doing, and so on. And I just want to, building on what I said earlier, that this line between humans and technology is not a natural one; it's a social one, because technologies are very much embedded in our social and economic structures. So there's that fact, and also there is also especially in the current economy, there's a global component of this, that you cannot understand what AI is doing out of the global context where this is happening. Now, with that said, I think a lot of conversation coming from places like McKinsey and Silicon Valley and so on has been on this notion of what the notion of capacity. What can computers do? What are they capable of doing? And I think we have to stop doing this. I think this is the wrong question. This is the kind of question that has put us in the place that we are. Because rather than focusing on what computers can do or are capable of doing, we should ask, what does it take, basically, what kind of social, economic, cultural, political environments are, can enable, computers to do the kinds of things that we are asking them to do. And I can give any number of examples of why this shift of question is very important. And to me, I'm not an occupational, health specialist, but to me, from what I've heard from my colleagues here on the panel, that is the kind of also maybe the shift of question that your discipline should make, rather than asking, just about the psychology of this, asking it about, the sociology or the economics of this or the politics of this. So that would be my starting point.
Yeah, I want to come back to you also, Maureen. Because you've blamed a lot of the problems we face today to that binary between management's drive to productivity and growth, as opposed to and which affects workers and poses more stress in terms of organizational risk factors to their well-being. I mean, the reason we're talking about all this is a lot of people today suffer chronic diseases, and not just psychological. They could be gastrointestinal and physical, and every day that we are worked under pressure and forced to produce more than our capacity, we're losing we don't have to look too far. I mean, there are societies living on painkillers just to work 1 or 2 jobs a day and to ensure a living. And this is encouraged sometimes by electronic wristbands and pace appliances that actually nudge a worker to work more, to go to the next assignment. At the same time, these same technological gadgets are helping us, nudging us when we're spending too much time on the screen, or helping survey a lot of new hazards and risks, or old hazards and risks, and allowing workers to take time off and to manage these hours of work and shifts. So coming to you, Maureen, along the same lines, how do you see a world where people don't have jobs?
So I think that, we know that there's going to be, increasing unemployment in the future. There's just not going to be enough jobs to go around. So if technology is replacing some of the more mundane kinds of occupations or job tasks, it does help us to reflect on, the question, what does it take to have a meaningful, fulfilling life? And do you need a job to have that? And when we think about jobs, in general, we're thinking about working for somebody else. And when you're working for somebody else, it's usually the case that whatever you produce, it's in surplus, so that whoever's hiring you can make a profit out of what you're doing. That's how it works. So if it's the case that technology can take care of some of the more mundane activities that we do, and if there was, so I don't want to forget the conflict between labour and capital, because I think that's crucial to think about. But alongside of that, if there was a basic universal income, so that people that are in the caring professions or caring for their parents, or they become unemployed, or they become retired, they simply go onto this universal basic income. And so there's no stigma attached to what your status is in society at the time. It means that you don't always have to rely on working in a mundane, stupidifying job just to make ends meet. You have some sort of social security. It also means that it might put some pressure on employers to offer better work. Okay, so if it's not the case that everyone desperately needs work to survive, then this could drive up the quality of the work. So at the moment in Australia, we have, of course, the gig economy. And if you're on unemployment benefits, you have to spend quite a lot of your time during the week trying to find a job. And you have to report, what jobs you've tried to look for. And there aren't any, so it's quite stressful. Because the gig economy doesn't require, in general, qualifications and so on, people are, saying, well, you have to go and get a job in the gig economy because, you can get a job there. So if there was this kind of social security, I'm not sure how it works in all economies, but we know that there is wealth around, that can be redistributed. I think that then people can be more creative. They can think about changing careers without facing, absolute poverty. They can think about, working 4 days a week and so on.
Great. Yes, I think we've focused a lot of our discussion on some of the developed world issues, and there are still some persistent struggles in the developing world that we're not going to forget about, but we are running out of time, and I'd like to get some questions from the audience. But before I do, I'd like to touch on the issue of gender, and by gender I mean women and men. With these changes and with the responsibilities and division of roles between genders, do we see, my question is to you, Maria, with the data segregated by women, are women who still today carry the bigger responsibility of care at home, utilizing these new technologies as a good solution for them, or is it just making matters worse to have access to these ad hoc platforms of work?
Well, I think this is a very important issue to consider, right? Especially in terms of work and life balance for women who work from home and that have decided to, for example, go on teleworking. Although it is recognized that women who choose these kinds of work, when the working hours are limited and controlled, it can be a way or a facilitator to work and combine family issues, right? But Latin America, for example, has the lowest rates of female participation in the workforce compared to, for example, OECD countries, North America, European countries. And telework has been usually presented as an alternative for that more women integrate the workforce. And in a certain way, of course, it can help, but it's important to not forget the condition of isolation that that sometimes telework implies. In this sense, women are being part of the workforce, but they are not being included completely. So I think that's an issue to keep in mind. On the other hand, based on household surveys from Latin America, one of the main reasons expressed by women who don't work is having problems to taking care of dependent or adult children, dependent children or adults. For that cases, of course, telework can be an option, but if children or adults' caregiving tasks are not solved, it is finally a way to maintain women in traditional roles associated to a sexual work division. They are being able to work, but in a space limited to their home and still complying with those works related to caregiving. So, when it is possible to combine all those tasks, caregiving, work, household chores, etc., some studies in the region have demonstrated that personal time is the one that is most sacrificed for women. So I think that these new forms of work associated with technology, of course, it can be an opportunity for women, but I think that regulation is crucial. It's a very, very important issue.
Thank you so much. I have a number more questions that we haven't been able to touch on, but I'd like to turn to the audience and to hear from you if you have issues you want to raise, questions that we can discuss. Yes, so first we have the lady in the second row. We're going to maybe answer, depending on the questions, directly or group them depending on that. So we're starting with the lady in the second row first, then.
Well, I'm Nicholas Ashford from MIT in Cambridge. This applies to both this plenary and it applies to the report as a whole. You can't talk about the future of work or people without talking about the future of the economy. The future of the economy is the train that has left the station and is having such tremendous impact, basically, on people. I mean, what working does is one of two things. It gives people purchasing power and it gives people meaning in their life. Both of those things are changing. Now, if there isn't enough work, and I think there won't be enough work and enough, certainly in the North, then you've got to provide the mechanisms for increasing the earning capacity of people, not through wages, but through the ownership of the means of productive capacity. They need to own part of the, basically, things which drive the economy, so that purchasing power can be there. Secondly, the technologies that are being developed are basically benefiting an increasingly small percentage of the population. We have an enormous maldistribution of wealth and ownership. These, again, are trains that have left the station. If you don't address these issues specifically, so that the human can be the center of the reason for government and the reason that any of us do anything, then I think you're missing the boat. On universal basic income, a great idea in the short run. In the long run, there's not enough money under the present circumstances to pay people not to work. Nor do I think it's the way to go from a social well-being perspective. The point is to design work back into the process, to let not a small group of people decide what's being produced and where it's being produced, but to democratize the process. The problem is the economy and the democratization of the economy. If you don't have your eyes on that problem, you are working at the margin, I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll let Maureen...
the Marxist theory is that the problem is that the ownership of production is by capital, and this causes alienation of the workers from the process. So any form of collective ownership or redistribution like that would be highly desirable. But exactly how do you do that? I mean, he is one that has predicted the boom and bust kind of cycles in society, and in the end, it is a socialisation process of bailing out banks and fixing the economy. And of course, he predicted, following capitalism would be socialism, which is, more along the lines that you were talking about. But I just, maybe a revolution or something like that. I just don't know how that's going to transform the situation. Can't see the capitalists giving up the means of production without a fight.
But they can share ownership.
They
can share ownership in ways which are meaningful. And I mean just giving people a little more money in their pension plans.
Sure.
I mean, by the way, you talk about a revolution. I used to tell my students, there'll never be another French Revolution. Well, take a look at the Yellow Jackets and tell me what you call it.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. Well, we might be facing that.
Thank you so much for that. It's really relevant, and the point is always, how do we actually make this happen? And we're all in agreement on the various potential theoretical suggestions that this could follow, but let's see how we can operationalize some of these ideas. We go to the next question.
Thank you very much for that. I just wanted to offer a different angle, maybe, because I was listening today and yesterday's presentation, and I think before getting fully depressed, I was thinking about what could be the good way to use technology, maybe, and I think I'm following a little bit on Hamid's point on artificial intelligence and how we could use them. So I've been working a lot with migrant workers who have very minimum power and very precarious condition, and for example in the UK they do manage to organize and unionize and gain some rights. And so I was just thinking if maybe we as academic, we need to find new ways to maybe look at what happens out of academic research, and how can we evaluate what happens outside academia and academic. I'm repeating myself. And I just wanted to give two examples that I know about, which is an app that have been developed by some NGOs and charities that inform migrant workers about their rights, and that give them contact if they have or need any support, or any some application who have been used to report anonymously bullying and harassment, or putting women in touch with their lawyers. And I thought these are amazing ways to use technology maybe to improve work and reduce psychosocial hazards, for example. So I just wanted your thoughts on how we as academic, we can find ways and funding to look at what happens outside of academic research and the grey literature, for example.
And I could, yeah, okay. I couldn't agree more. So this speaks to the point that I was trying to make, that it's really not the technology that we should put the blame on. It is the social structure that embeds the technology, and that's what we have to change. And short of revolution, which is maybe an option or not, the social policy makes a huge difference, and that's one of the things that if you look closely, at different places, you see the difference that the same technology can be made in different ways in different places. So there was a survey in the U.S. and they asked people, how worried are you about artificial intelligence? 70% of people said that they are anxious and worried. They asked the same question in Sweden, and it was less than 30%. And then also there was a title, an essay in the New York Times with the title, AI is coming or robots are coming, the Swedes are not worried about it, and then, along those lines, we've been lucky with my wife to be in different places the last few years. One of the things that we noticed in Denmark, for instance, is that there are many young people with children, on the street, in parks and so on and so forth. And then I noticed that maybe there's some social policy that supports this, and lo and behold, they have about two years of maternity leave in Denmark. In the US, it is 3 weeks. 3 weeks, 2 years. In Czech Republic, where we are now this summer, it is 3 years of maternity leave. So these are the places where social policy could make a huge difference. We don't, as I said, short of a revolution, there are concrete things that can be done to basically slow down this economy train that you mentioned that has left the platform and it seems to be out of control. But somebody should take control of it.
Are there any more? Yes, please.
Hello, good evening. My name is José Macquarie, Central European University. My question is in regards to the 24/7 societies in the context where technology impacts the world of work in the ways that did not happen during the industrialization. So the aspects the panelists were talking about in terms of, for example, Maureen, rising unemployment in the future due to impact of technology is not surprising. This anxiety was around the time of industrialization when mechanization replaced human workers. So my question to the panelists is, I would like to know in what ways, if anyone can make any remarks around the ways of counteracting the intensified labor that workers now have to put in around the clock. In terms of occupational health, how can occupational health address what Bourdieu calls hysteresis effect, which NIOSH has found among the call center operators in Delhi, experiencing isolation due to the fact that they cannot meet or discuss or form some sort of relationships with their customers in the US. Thank you very much.
I think part of the answer is to use the technology that's causing the problem to help address it. We heard one example of apps for migrant workers, but we have a fantastic capability for organizing workers with the technologies that they're using. But there has to be the will, there has to be the leadership to do that kind of organization. But that would be one step, is to get some cohesiveness and break down the isolation. It certainly may not be the only way, but it would be one step.
Thank you. Regarding your question and also yours, I think that the role of the state is very, very important. But which role can be more efficient? And I think that the main task is how can we address intersectoriality. I think that Of course, we can create apps where workers can organize, for example, but I think the state should provide spaces where different sectors, including academia, can gather together to look and to look for better ways to address these issues. So I think that's a very, very important issue.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I would just like to add that it would be good to question the quality of work from a call centre. Do we really need call centres? What value do they add to society? And can we ask the question about what we produce? Is it a worthwhile thing to produce this widget? We are told we've got 12 years left before things, implode. Can we start to question the kinds of things that we are producing and the rate at which we're producing resources, using resources? So a lot of the mining companies in Australia are mining 24 hours a day. Why is that? What's the race to dig up all this stuff so fast? And so they've got shift workers, which now that brings a new set of problems, and isolation, like people have to fly miles away from their home to work in these isolated mines. So the same issue about isolation. What's the rush? Like, do we need a growth economy? What's growth all about? Why do we have to have this economy like we have it? Can't we try and humanise it somehow? Talk about a different kind of economy and value, not about GDP, productivity or profits.
Thank you for that. We had a question at the back first, and I have two other questions here. Please.
I think the future of work is an important debate and offers a lot of opportunity to discuss these very important topics that we have and been discussing, for example, this afternoon. But at the same time, we should not forget from where this concept is coming from. It's not coming from trade unions, it's not coming from civil societies, it's coming from global consultant companies, and I don't think that we should grant them the right to tell us what the future of work should look like. It comes from technological providers who have been doped by financialization to a certain degree of, they have so much money they don't even know where to invest them. So we should we should take this opportunity, and definitely we are taking this opportunity to discuss very important topics, but we should not forget from where this concept is coming from. It took like 80 years to define the first industrial revolution as the first industrial revolution. Now we have a fourth industrial revolution that nobody has seen it yet. And it has been already announced as, it's coming. And I think that it makes sense to adjust to future and to prepare, but at the same time I think we should really question these visions. These are technological providers, technological expectations that are building business models for the future. They want to sell technologies. And they're desperate to that because, as Mazzucato said to us last year, investments are very low in our contemporary economies. Finance is taking a lot of this value. So technological providers are desperately looking for customers to sell them robots, to send them new clever digital factors and so on. They're not very successful actually. So I think that we should also question this vision of the future of work, and not only discuss about what are the implications, but also build a sort of ownership about the future of work. Future of work is about political choices that we make today, and it's not, in the end, of technological providers and global consultants.
Thank you for your comment. Did you want
just to reiterate that, again, I very much agree with that perspective. On a panel yesterday, where this notion of future of work was discussed, and Frey, this paper that kind of launched this whole debate, Frey and Osborne, and so on. And the author was generous. The presenter was very generous with this approach, suggesting that this is maybe just a misinterpretation of their result, their approach. And my question was basically that maybe we should go back to the basics and not be so generous with this approach. And again, McKinsey is a great example of what you're talking about. This is a global company. Unfortunately, they have the ear of many policymakers in different parts of the world. But that doesn't necessarily mean that McKinsey has the best interests of the people of those countries, let alone the more disempowered people. So I agree with you. It is a matter of taking the control back, taking the initiative back, and not taking these claims for granted, as if these have come from the sky.
Yes, fully agree. I'm going to take two last questions and come back for final closing. Yes.
Thank you very much. I have the feeling that sometimes we talk about these changes as a binary situation, work, non-work, and my fear is that the transition is going to be much longer, that there are sectors that are considerably globalized, modern, but the basic technology that they are using still being the same technology. For example, the garment sector, which is globalized, modern in terms of the patterns and the new quick fashion and all the things, but the technology is still being a young lady with very low skills sewing in a machine in a remote country. But if you get into H&M or CNA, you can learn the geography of half of the world just by looking at the tags. Or the example of the bank tellers they have been replaced by machines. But actually, when you look at the short-run impact on the people, is that what you have done is narrow the skills of the workers. Perhaps you didn't destroy employment or jobs, but what you have done is to create a long chain of jobs that they have very narrow skills. Now the teller of the bank is replaced by a young lady who teaches the people how to use the ATM, plus a police guy who comes and feeds with money the machine, plus the auditor that comes and takes the other things, and with very narrow skills. My question is, and although I agree with the colleague that says that we need a change in the system, in the meanwhile, when we have this increasing of the power of the capital over labor, how can we deal with this thing of the narrowing of skills? How can we sort out this issue in the medium term until we make the revolution or we change the system a little bit more consistently?
Who would like to answer that question? We could also have answers from the audience.
I have a quick comment. Maybe I'm not claiming that I have an answer to that question, but well, thanks for these wonderful thoughts. There's this kind of narrative which we hear a lot from people with good intentions. Most famously, and I don't want to name names, but Bjorkson and McAfee, who have written this book. And essentially, the solution is that we have to educate people, have to re-educate and re-skill. People with college degrees are doing jobs for less than minimum wage. Give me a break. Education and reskilling are not the answer. So this goes back again to the comment. The system has to be fixed. The challenge is, again, short of revolution, what are the options? And I think this is. I mentioned to my colleagues yesterday, we were discussing about the panel. This is at this point an awareness campaign. That there's a lot of confusion created by Silicon Valley, by technologies, and economists helping them, unfortunately, about what is going on. People are confused. These technologies are speeding ahead. We have to just catch up, and none of that is accurate. There's nothing inevitable about any of this. This is not written in set in stone. We just have to hold back and pause and say, okay, is this working for us? And I think that takes, of course, organization, it takes collective bargaining, and so on and so forth, and these are beyond my expertise. There are people here who are much more qualified. But I agree with you that this is not just about, technology and, taking skills away from people.
Maureen, you wanted to add?
In a capitalist economy, all the institutions are all geared up to support that kind of economy. So it's a huge thing that needs to change. In Australia, we have the Fair Work Commission, and they spend a lot of their time dismantling the enterprise bargaining arrangements between labour and capital. the reason is it's in the public interest, and the public interest test is it anti-competitive if they keep a collective bargaining arrangement? So, you know, all decisions are being made on the basis of an economic capital argument. So, I mean, it is clear that the range of skills is narrowing. I think that, you know, we can try and talk to people more about what's going on instead of maybe being a bit blindsided by the threat of technology. Actually thinking about, you know, actually the biggest threats are in other areas, I think, which is about the conflict and where the resources are going at the moment. So how do we sort of annex those resources and bring them back? How do we empower workers? You know, there is so much work being done on, you know, training workers to be resilient instead of learning how to be resistant to some of these forces.
Thank you, Maureen. This is the last question, and we have to come back to the panel. Please.
How concerned should we be about the notion of resilience that has entered the narrative, in particular, I'm talking about psychosocial health and safety, psychosocial illness. So and while this is not necessarily a bad thing, workplaces are talking about mindfulness and so on to get more productivity out of the workers, for you to be more focused, and also for your own well-being and mental health. But this also detracts from the more structural issues that we have been talking about work. So it becomes a case of you, the individual, you're not resilient enough, you need to do things to strengthen yourself. And you could go to counseling, you could do mindfulness, you could meditate forever. But if you go back into the working conditions, the whole work is organized, the intensification of work, it remains the same. So how concerned should we be in terms of the narrative, the individualization of health and safety, and trying to still talk about the structural issues that affect work? And it goes back also to technology, because the idea that if you have robots, just speaking loosely, then they don't want to take leave, they don't get sick, they don't want time off to look after children and that kind of a thing. So how concerned should we be?
Paul, to you.
I think we should be very concerned. We have fought throughout the history of occupational safety and health to get away from the idea of blaming the worker. Enhancing resilience is another form of putting it on the worker, as opposed to what you're suggesting and others have suggested, that we need to make the kinds of structural changes that change the dialogue, change the environment, change the working conditions, so that it isn't the responsibility of the worker. So this is a critical piece, and we should be very concerned with this direction.
I'll just add to that at the ILO, over the years working in this area as well, the terms mindfulness and resilience do not exist in our vocabulary, and it's really about organizational changes and structural changes in the working environment, and through human resource management and other job clarity and division of labor, etc. That again bring us back to sometimes dimensions that are out of our control, but definitely if we were to think of more of a lifestyle of health and well-being, we would think of promoting health, and it is then up to the worker to know about options for living better, eating better, sleeping better, taking time off, etc. And it's them to choose what form best suits them. But it's a structural responsibility to say these are your working times, or to assess by product, or to give various shifts that work for different people. And that's what concerns me about 24/7, or some countries that now say working time is between 8 and 4, and 4 you should go home, take care of other areas, which doesn't work for a lot of people who may wish to take 3 hours during the day and then work in the evening because that suits their various needs. So we need to consider with these changes changes, that we're also flexible enough to accommodate different needs of different people across different sectors. So thank you all for your comments. I'm going to come back to a final quick thoughts from our panelists before we close this session and let you go for drinks at our reception. Starting with Hamid.
Final thoughts. Okay. I'm going to say the obvious. I think human beings are whole objects, whole things. You know, we cannot break a human life into pieces and deal with them separately. In this app-oriented environment, unfortunately, more and more of that is happening. Every problem that we face, we want to develop an app and fix it through an app. That is totally misguided, and I think so. My thinking is that we have, going back to your point, you know, if you want to think about, you know, work as an identity, we cannot separate it from decency and from dignity. If you want to think about, you know, autonomy, we cannot separate autonomy from power and transparency. If you want to think about, you know, technology, we cannot separate it from geography and social structure and so on. So my brief comment is that let's think about human beings for what they are, as whole things. Let's not break them into pieces, which is a legacy of, as we know, of scientific management, Taylorism, and so on. That's a different story.
I was just thinking back to the question about, you know, what can we do in the here and now. You know, we can make the most of the situation, and I don't want to sort of tranquilise the problem, but you know, we might think about different measurement tools that we have to assess what is going on in the workplace and benchmark and try and, you know, launch an argument about what the working conditions are like. And you know, you could even launch an argument about how these working conditions affect productivity, because we know that they do. But, you know, that is not a long-run solution to this problem. I'm optimistic that something positive will happen in the long run, but I'm not sure exactly what it is.
Maybe your psychosocial safety climate?
Well, yeah. I mean, we developed this tool to assess psychosocial safety climate, which actually reflects management concern for the psychological health of workers versus their emphasis on productivity. And when we measure this, we can predict, you know, future working conditions, you know, future health and well-being of the workers, and it's an evidence-based tool. You know, we've been able to talk to management and actually get them to really start taking notice of this. And, you know, it's just a sad thing, you have to talk to them in terms of dollars, but actually maybe in the short run this is really helpful for workers. So it's a safety climate, the corporate climate for psychological health and well-being. We can measure it, it is evidence-based, and it can predict future working conditions for workers.
Could you please repeat the title of the tool?
Psychosocial Safety Climate. PSC.
Well, I think in the case of Latin America, one important issue to think what to do is to get to know what do workers need. I think that in Latin America it's important to reinforce the importance of research. Get to know who are workers in teleworking, who are working in digital platforms. Although we have some experience, it's far from being completed. So I think it's a major change for at least for my region. And to close, I think it is unquestionable the benefits that technology can bring in order to working conditions and to make organizational work more efficient. But regulation from the state, as I said, I think is very, very important in order to protect and assure minimal labor and social rights for workers. To define that regulation, as I said, I think intersectoriality should be an object of policymaking. And as I heard yesterday in a very interesting panel, I'm sorry if the person is not here because I'm gonna quote here. She said employment matters too much to society to leave market alone. And I think that for me it was like a very graphic way to understand all of the discussions we are having here. And yes, we can accept and incorporate the new changes that technology can bring, but without forgetting the importance of regulation, prevention of occupational risk, and the promotion of decent work policies.
And I would go back to what my colleague said, that this is really about an awareness campaign, raising the awareness of the safety and health hazards of the pervasive technologies that are being in some ways foisted upon the world. And we've heard that safety and health are fundamental to decent work. I think we need to even elevate that concept to say that safety and health are rights of every person. Safety and health at work are rights of every person. And we need to get that awareness and the research to substantiate that brought forward so that more nations are thinking along those lines. That will be the foundation for a lot of the great ideas that we've heard.
Thank you so much, Paul, for ending on that note. We echo your call for establishing it as a fundamental right, as it is recognized as a human right, and the world of work needs to play its part in effective implementation of this inherent right to life. At the end of the day today, we're talking about well-being as if it's an accessory or secondary, but we're talking about lives, deaths at work by the millions every year, and not just that, diseases and people living with chronic handicaps and disabilities and situations due to working and trying to live and take care of their families. And so we are here today as part and parcel of a core element of what the labor organization moving into the 100th century, the 2nd century, needs to be focusing on, that human that we want, that is our resource, that we want to protect, and we want to live a good quality life in this century without being affected by all the nuisance that's happening around us. Thank you all for joining us. It's been great, and I hope to see you downstairs at the reception for drinks. Thanks.